Have you ever wondered how JavaScript handles asynchronous tasks? This is a query that often pops up when delving into the world of JavaScript. Today, we're going to unravel the magic behind asynchronous JavaScript, a crucial concept that makes our web application smooth and ultra-responsive. When dealing with operations that take some time to complete, like fetching data from an API or reading a file from a disk, JavaScript doesn't simply sit around twiddling its virtual thumbs. Instead, it uses asynchronous operations, allowing the rest of your code to continue running while it waits for that time-consuming task to finish. This prevents your web page from freezing up, creating a seamless user experience. This magic trick is performed using a couple of key tools: promises and async await. These tools give JavaScript its power to handle tasks asynchronously, keeping your web applications ticking along nicely. Now let's explore how JavaScript achieves this with promises and async await. Promises are one of the powerful tools JavaScript uses to handle asynchronous tasks. Now, you may be wondering, what exactly is a promise in JavaScript? Well, let's dive into it. A promise is an object that represents a value which may not be available yet, but will be available in the future. Or it will never be available because of an error. Just like the real-life promises we make, a JavaScript promise has three states. The first one is pending, which means the promise is neither fulfilled nor rejected yet. It's in a sort of limbo, waiting for a result. The second one is fulfilled, which means the promise has successfully completed its operation. And the third state is rejected, which means an error occurred during the operation. Now let's illustrate this with a simple example. Let's say we have a function that returns a promise. This function simulates an asynchronous task, like fetching data from a server. Here's how we create this promise. We declare a function, let's call it fetchUserData, and inside this function, we return a new promise. This promise takes a function as a parameter, which itself takes two parameters, resolve and reject. Now inside this function, we simulate an asynchronous operation using the setTimeout function. If the operation is successful, we call the resolve function with the result. If there's an error, we call the reject function with an error message. But how do we handle the results of this promise? That's where the then and catch methods come in. The then method is called when the promise is fulfilled, and the catch method is called when the promise is rejected. So, we call fetchUserData, and then we chain the then method to it. Inside the then method, we pass a function that takes the result of the promise as a parameter. This function will be executed when the promise is fulfilled. Similarly, we chain the catch method to the then method. Inside the catch method, we pass a function that takes an error message as a parameter. This function will be executed when the promise is rejected. So what we have here is a way to handle asynchronous operations sequentially. We start an operation and then we say, when you're done, do this. If there's an error, do that. This is the power of promises in JavaScript. They give us a way to write asynchronous code that looks and behaves like synchronous code, but as we will see in the next section, there's an even more elegant way to achieve this, using async await. Promises give us a way to handle asynchronous operations sequentially, but there is an even more elegant way to achieve this, using async await. Async await, introduced in ES8, is built on top of promises but provides a cleaner and more readable way to handle asynchronous tasks. To put it simply, async await is syntactic sugar over promises, making your code easier to read and more manageable. Let's start with the basics. To declare an asynchronous function, we use the async keyword before the function declaration. This tells the JavaScript engine that the function is asynchronous, and it may not complete immediately. Here's a simple example. Async function my function, / your code here. This function is now asynchronous. But what does that mean? It means that it returns a promise. If the function returns a value, the promise will be resolved with that value. If the function throws an error, the promise will be rejected with that error. Now let's talk about the await keyword. It's the real magic of async/await. The await keyword can only be used inside an async function, and it makes JavaScript wait until the promise resolves or rejects. It essentially pauses the execution of the function and resumes when the promise is settled, returning the resolved value. Here's a simple example. Async function my function. Let value = await promise. / code here runs only after the promise is resolved. In this example, the function will pause at the line with await and resume its execution once the promise is resolved, assigning the resolved value to the value variable. The beauty of async await is that it makes your asynchronous code look and behave like synchronous code. This is a huge win for readability and simplicity. Now what about error handling? If a promise rejects, the await expression throws the rejected value, so we can use a try-catch block to handle errors. Let's look at an example. Async function my function, try, catch error. In this example, if the promise rejects, the catch block will be executed, logging the error to the console. Async/await is a powerful tool in your JavaScript toolbox. It simplifies working with asynchronous tasks, making your code cleaner, more readable, and easier to debug. It's important to remember that async await is built on top of promises. It doesn't replace promises, it enhances them. One key takeaway here is that async await and promises are not two distinct ways to handle asynchronous tasks, but rather, async await is a way to handle promises more efficiently. So, understanding promises is crucial to effectively using async await. In closing, the async await syntax is a great addition to JavaScript. It simplifies asynchronous programming and makes your code easier to understand. With async await, we can write asynchronous code that looks and behaves like synchronous code. So, don't shy away from it, embrace it, and make your JavaScript journey a little bit smoother. Let's quickly recap what we've learned about asynchronous JavaScript, promises, and async await. Our journey began with understanding asynchronous JavaScript. We discovered that it allows us to perform lengthy operations like network requests without blocking the execution of our code. This means our web applications can continue to respond to user interactions while waiting for these tasks to complete, leading to a smoother user experience. Next, we delved into promises. A promise in JavaScript represents a value that may not be available yet but is expected in the future. We learned about the three states of a promise: pending, fulfilled, and rejected. A promise starts in the pending state, and upon completion, it either gets fulfilled if the operation was successful, or rejected if an error occurred. We also touched on promise chaining, where the result of a promise is used to determine the next promise in the chain, allowing us to perform complex, sequential asynchronous operations with ease. Then we transitioned into the world of async await. These are special syntax constructs in JavaScript that make working with promises more comfortable and less error-prone. The async keyword allows a function to be paused and resumed, while the await keyword is used to pause the execution of the function until the promise is resolved. This makes our asynchronous code look and behave like synchronous code, making it easier to read and maintain. We emphasize the importance of these concepts for any budding web developer. Asynchronous JavaScript, promises, and async await are not just fancy buzzwords. They are powerful tools in your JavaScript toolkit that allow you to handle asynchronous operations effectively. Understanding and mastering these concepts will help you build web applications that are highly responsive and user-friendly. Remember, practice is key. Don't be discouraged if these concepts seem challenging at first. With time and consistent practice, you'll be able to handle asynchronous tasks in JavaScript with ease. So keep exploring, keep experimenting, and never stop learning. The world of JavaScript is vast and ever-evolving, and there's always something new to discover and master. Mastering these concepts will allow you to build highly responsive and user-friendly web applications. Keep practicing, and soon handling asynchronous tasks in JavaScript will be a breeze.